Call Me Irresponsible is such a delightful episode of Cheers. There are so many really great moments in this, and some that are maybe not that positive, by which I mean they're quite emotional and quite upsetting, but I'll talk about that when we get there. This is the 20th episode of the 7th season of Cheers. It is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I love the open. I love the cold open. I think it's fantastic. We have this woman called Marge Thornhill. She's played by Anne Morgan Guilbert, and she asks Sam if he remembers her, and we don't find out who she is for a good few seconds, and then she reveals that she went to every home game Sam ever played. And as Sam explains, there are a lot of people at those games, but she is so insistent that he would remember her. And she stands up and she shouts across the bar, bearing in mind there's not much distance between them, "Hey Malone, you pitch like my sister, why don't you go home and make a dress?" So apparently she used to throw a lot of insults at Sam, and he remembered her, and it was a really sweet moment. And he says to her, "Do the one where you say I couldn't get the ball across the plate if I drove it there in my car." I love the fact that he was good-humoured about it, and she said, "No, that was then, this is now." And then she starts shouting about the martini. So I rather enjoyed it, definitely. Probably one of my favourite intros in quite a while. The next scene is really busy. It establishes quite a lot of different narratives. And it starts off with the guys discussing the worst ways to die. And then we find out that it's Carla's second wedding anniversary. And Eddie's not necessarily been very attentive recently. He's basically being quite neglectful. And Carla is convinced that Eddie has been neglecting her to set her up for the anniversary surprise. So it's something she doesn't expect. And that's kind of the main narrative in the episode, but we also have a few other things happening as well. Lilith comes in. She's delighted to announce that her belly button has turned from an innie to an outie. And she and Frasier ask Norm to decorate the child's nursery, which is really lovely. Norm had just done something similar for a friend with, I didn't write it down, but I think it was gummy bears and Smurfs, which sounds absolutely adorable. And that's not what Lilith and Frasier want. They want something very bland. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Sam then comes in with his chart for people to gamble on the upcoming basketball game. And, of course, Rebecca says, "No gambling, not acceptable. We can't do this here." It's fine. It is, as they call it, championship tic-tac-toe, which I quite liked. And then somebody comes in. As I said, it's a very busy scene with a lot of things happening. Somebody comes in with a dark beard and dark glasses, and he definitely looks quite mysterious, I guess. And Carla thinks this is Eddie in disguise, come to surprise her, which would be really, really sweet. And she touches this person's butt. And it's not Eddie. Could have been really awkward, but the guy didn't react, and Carla just decided to slide onto the stool next to him. So, not a bad way to end this scene. But we then cut to a little later on. Eddie is still not there. He has not sent a surprise. Clearly, Carla's starting to worry. People are watching the basketball. Woody won $125. Norm then comes in with a colour scheme for the nursery that he describes as, and I quote, "a bit drab," which is what Lilith and Frasier want. And this is basically all we get for this part of the narrative with Norm, but there are a lot of things going on here, so we didn't really have the time to flesh that out too much more. A little while later, Woody is then counting his money, and one of the notes has a note written on it, which was a note from Cliff's mother for Cliff. Apparently, well, obviously that was one of the notes that Cliff had used to pay for his share in the championship tic-tac-toe. And it was quite sweet. And then some flowers arrive. And there's a note. It seems like Eddie hasn't forgotten the anniversary. And Carla thinks, great, there are flowers. This is the first of many gifts to arrive. And she reads out the note and immediately throws the flowers into the trash can. And we don't find out why for a couple of seconds. There's a tiny bit of suspense. And Carla explains that it's clear somebody else ordered these flowers for her because they signed it Edward. And Eddie's name isn't Edward. It's Guy, spelled G-U-Y. And it was very clear that the guys had done this. And on the one hand, that's a very sweet thing to do. But at the same time, they didn't really think it through, because what if Eddie did order flowers and they later arrived? I guess Carla would think that he was just sending multiple bouquets of flowers, but I don't think they did the right thing, but I guess their heart was in the right place. And then I think it's very clear that Carla is no longer expecting anything from Eddie, because we see her using the phone in the bar to phone the florist and order her own flowers. And we then cut to midnight, and Carla decides to sit with the thought that, yes, her anniversary is technically over, but not where Eddie is. He's 3 hours behind. It's still their anniversary. There is still time. The flowers arrive. We, of course, as the viewer, know that. Not entirely sure what florist delivers at midnight, but the flowers have arrived, and we know that they're from Carla to herself. And it seems like she'd get away with it. But at the same time, the florist phones the bar to say that there was a problem with her credit card payment and she has to go down and pay cash. Again, not sure what florist would deliver the flowers without securing the payment, but I'm not going to think too much into that. And Carla admits pretty quickly that, yes, she bought them for herself. And I feel like this is a strong sign that Carla definitely feels defeated at this point, because maybe earlier in the episode, Carla would have quickly come up with an excuse. Maybe Eddie, they shared a credit card and that was the phone number on the credit card, so he'd ordered them, but they knew to contact Cheers. I don't know. I feel like that would have been an excuse. But this stage into the episode, Carla is clearly feeling really defeated, which honestly is not great. It doesn't feel very good. But then the comedy comes back up again in the next scene. Well, the next thing we see is Woody. Well, it seems like Woody won again. He starts to celebrate. And then it turns out that actually Rebecca won some money and she rubs it in his face. And it just so happens that there's an off-duty detective sitting at the bar and he asks, is there gambling happening here? And Rebecca says, no, I earned this money. And I love the fact that we get a pause. There are a couple of seconds between that and what she says next, which makes it all the more funny, because after a couple of seconds, she's clearly realising she needs to think of a way to have earned that money. And she says, I'm a prostitute. And just the way she said it was so, so funny. I laughed I laughed so much at that. Kirstie Alley's delivery there was just absolutely perfect. And then a gift arrives. Well, a box arrives. Carla thinks this must be the gift that Eddie has sent, and she opens it, and this is probably my least favourite bit of the episode. It's very well done, but it's very heavy and very difficult to watch. And honestly, I got really emotional because Carla starts to look through this box of laundry, thinking, Eddie occasionally sends laundry for her to do, and I feel like it would have been cheaper for him to do his own laundry, but nevertheless, he sends this laundry, and she starts to rummage through the box and throwing things everywhere, trying to find this hidden anniversary gift, this present that he's hidden among the laundry. She's stuffing her hand down his socks to try and find something, and there's nothing there. And honestly, it's really, really difficult. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And Carla's had enough. She's going home. She tells everybody else to go back to their lives. She says, and I quote, Norm, order a beer, Clavin, Burrows. And she's having this rant as she's about to leave. There's a phone call, and it's Eddie. And of course, Carla rushes to the phone, and Eddie reveals that he had his plane ticket. He was about to come home, but then he got called back for rehearsals. And my first thought was, if you were a good person, you would have told Carla this. Yes, maybe you want to surprise her by coming home, but the very first thing he should have done, as soon as he found out that he was getting called back to rehearsals, is phone her. And clearly it didn't happen the very second he found out. And that really irritated me. And I feel like, okay, I just did some Googling and I can't quite get my timeline straight, by which I mean I can't find out the exact date. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to give away too much. But long story short, Jay Thomas, who plays Eddie LeBec, says some not nice things about Rhea Perlman, and that affects what happens to the character. I will say no more about what happens to the character, but I'm wondering if with this episode, it was an intentional move to paint the character in a negative light, because he's clearly not doing the right things. He's not treating Carla well, and as fans of Carla, we don't want to see that. And I'm wondering if that was a very, very intentional move to set us up for things to follow. But I can't get my timeline straight because I can't find the exact date of when those nasty comments were made. If anybody can confirm whether that happened by this point, please feel free to let me know. I believe it did happen in 1989, but I'm not entirely sure when. So I'm absolutely just speculating on that, but nevertheless, I feel like Eddie is shifting in terms of his attitude. He's generally been a likable character up until this point. He's not really done anything too negative. Carla's been very paranoid, but we've never really had any real reason for that paranoia beyond Carla being Carla. But here we see Eddie behaving in a way that's not very likable at all, and I imagine that was intentional, but I'll say no more than that. But Carla is very happy, and I absolutely love this. She turns to the bar and she makes everybody repeat, "I am a very stupid person," which they then repeat, and then she makes them repeat, "and I will never doubt the undying love and total commitment that exists, always has existed, and always will exist between Carla and Eddie LeBec." And the bar repeats, "I am a very stupid person." I loved it. I absolutely adored it. And then the final scene, Carla goes through to the office where Sam is. And despite her display in front of the bar, it's clear that she's still not exactly convinced that Eddie did the right thing. And she makes Sam look her in the eyes and tell her that he did not call Eddie to remind him. And she threatens to put a curse on him. And she threatens to affect his tongue if he doesn't look her in the eyes and tell her the truth. And he does. He looks her in the eyes. He tells her he didn't call Eddie. Carla leaves, potentially satisfied. Sam is talking to himself and his tongue suddenly is not working properly. Does that mean Eddie was phoned by Sam? Well, that's my reading of it. I feel like that's definitely the intended interpretation here. Maybe one could argue that Sam was just worried that any curse from Carla would affect him, even if he was telling the truth. But I think it's pretty clear there. A clear reading is that Sam did indeed phone Eddie, which again just further suggests that Eddie is not a great person, at least with his treatment of Carla. But that aside, the only thing I didn't like in this episode, and it's not that I don't think it should have been in the episode, I just didn't like watching it, was Carla really rummaging through that box of laundry. It was heavy. It was heartbreaking. I didn't like seeing that, but other than that, it's generally quite a light episode and definitely very funny. Personal highlights, there are so many of them. Marge Thornhill standing up for the first time and shouting across the bar at Sam, and the reference to the championship tic-tac-toe, which I just thought was absolutely adorable, and Frasier and Lilith's response to Norm coming up with a cutesy idea for the nursery I quite liked. Rebecca referring to herself as a prostitute, because I absolutely loved the delivery of that line. And the second time the bar repeated, "I am a very stupid person." Absolutely fantastic, and that is so funny. I mean, I really needed that laugh. I needed that pick me up after the heavy scene, or the heavy moment earlier in that scene when Carla was rummaging through the box of laundry. Oh, very well done, very well delivered. It's an absolute delight. It's not a great episode for Eddie, not a good look for Eddie, but nevertheless, Call Me Irresponsible is still a really fantastic episode of Cheers.